Conscious capitalism is a new way of thinking about business that goes considerably beyond the traditional approach that most executives and business teachers take in thinking about business. So it's really about being as more so than it is about doing. It really has many dimensions to it. It really says that we are conscious, we are awake, we are mindful of all of the impacts that we have on the world, and that we think about the totality of all of that, and we recognize the interconnections and the interdependencies across that. As a metaphor there's a cartoon that I use which shows a boat in which we have some people sitting at one end of it, and the other end has sprung a leak, and there are some people desperately bailing out the water at that end, and the people sitting on the high end of the boat are saying, well, I'm sure glad the hole isn't in our end of the boat. Right? And the fact is that we are all in the same boat, and this attitude which we have had in the past and continue to have, which is that this is not our problem, or that we can't pay our employees subsistence wage and have them on public assistance while we're delivering disproportionate returns to investors, that is acceptable. Those ways of thinking reflect a lower level of consciousness about what business can be and should be in the world. As Gary Hamel says, we can buy people's time and we can buy their intellectual abilities to some extent. We cannot buy their passion and their creativity and their commitment and their enthusiasm. Those are all gifts that employees choose to give to us, and we have to earn them as businesses. And most businesses do not, in fact, are not deemed worthy of all of those things. So people actually don't bring those facets of themselves. And you can argue, as human beings, 80-90% of what we really are all about are those things. Right? The other stuff, even machines more and more can do what the other stuff is. Right? We can automate those processes. But those are really the human characteristics that these companies tap into dramatically, and that then conveys to customers, that conveys to community, etc., etc. You look for synergies. You need to look for ways to align the interests of everybody together. And that's where the value creation comes in. So you want to create a win-win-win-win-win rather than a win-lose set of outcomes. And that's really, I think, ultimately, if you start to understand why these companies perform as well as they do, those are some of the factors. And of course, loyalty is the other one, right? So they live in this web of loyalty where their customers are loyal, employees are loyal, suppliers. Everybody is loyal, everybody sustains them through bad times. Right? There's a two-way, it's not just a one-way loyalty. They don't just expect loyalty, they also give loyalty, and all of that contributes to their sustained performance over time. So not just a job, not just a career, but a calling. This is what I was born to do. This is something, if I win the lottery tomorrow and I don't need to work, I will still show up for work, because this is something that is meaningful to me. I feel like I'm doing something that, that matters and that I deeply enjoy, at a very fundamental level. And that's what we really need. So some people may look at this idea of conscious capitalism and simply view it as highly idealistic and not very practical, that the world of business is a rough and tumble, sort of dog-eat-dog kind of world. That's what we've always been taught, and that's the school of hard knocks and nice guys finish last and all of those kinds of metaphors that we have out there about business. We find that the reality is very different, that in fact this way of doing business is not only one that creates a great deal of well-being and happiness and contentment and so forth with different stakeholders, but that also it is in fact the secret to high performance. That there really is a need, I think, as a society and as business schools, for us to look at businesses and evaluate their performance with a much broader set of criteria. Right now we simply look at wealth creation. And we look at stock market appreciation, dividends, and things of that sort. But that's only one kind of wealth that companies create or destroy. Companies can also create or destroy social wealth or capital, emotional wealth, on the part of their employees, for example, and their customers, cultural wealth, intellectual wealth. You can even go so far as to say spiritual well-being as well is all impacted by corporations. And the larger the company, the greater its footprint on the world. Of course, one of the biggest challenges is how do you take a traditional business operating under the old paradigm of profit maximization, shareholder primacy, and traditional command and control leadership. how do you transform them into a conscious business? Now, this is not by any means an easy type of change. To have, in some sense, a DNA transplant, they need to re-examine their very reason for existing. Why do we exist? Why do we deserve to exist? Does the world need us? Would anybody miss us? Right? So you start with the idea of this higher purpose. And it doesn't come out of left field. You go back, look at your heritage, look at why you got started, look at what makes you successful, where you succeed, where you don't, look at what creates passion and engagement in your customers and your employees, etc. And you find the seeds of that somewhere in there. That there is this higher purpose. So there's a company in India that we're working with which was selling cooking oil and was doing okay, and actually was floundering a little bit, competing with Unilever and Procter & Gamble and others as the market opened up. And some years ago they decided that their higher purpose was going to be to reduce the incidence of heart disease in India, which has one of the highest rates of heart disease. And they said, oil contributes to that. So we're actually going to be all about reducing the incidence of heart disease. So we're going to educate people about heart disease. We're going to have all these free clinics and camps about cholesterol screening. We have a dial and nutritionist program. We have all these exercise things and so forth. Everybody got engaged and enthusiastic around that. And by the way, we'll have the healthiest possible oil. And we're going to encourage people to shift their consumption towards that and reduce their consumption of oil and all of those kinds of things. And that has completely turned the business around. That has increased sales of that brand by 400% over 5 years. It has made, 80% of the customers say they will never switch away from that brand. But again, the reason for doing all of this was not for that, to achieve that end. It was really to say, here's something worthwhile that we as a business can commit to and make a dent in. This idea of this tremendously high rate of heart disease, right? So it starts with that higher purpose, and that then creates engagement, enthusiasm, motivation, excitement, right? It's sort of a magnet that then aligns everybody in the same direction. So now you're all on the same side of the table as opposed to competing interests. If everybody believes in that, the customers believe, employees believe in that, suppliers, etc. We are moving towards really need-centered marketing rather than desire-centered marketing. Problem that marketing has run into, and Len Berry at Texas A&M has written a wonderful essay in one of our books on marketing reform, saying marketing needs to recapture its mission, which is really about focusing on the real needs. You don't need to sit at headquarters and tell everybody what to do. You set up the system in such a way, you align the feedbacks and the incentives in a certain fashion, so that now everybody is incentivized to do the right thing, and they're all pulling in the right direction, as opposed to sub-optimizing their little piece, which ultimately doesn't result in optimizing the whole system. So that's probably the biggest piece of this. Once you discover the purpose, is figuring out how to, in fact, create the stakeholder alignment and also meet the needs of each stakeholder at multiple levels. Just like for employees, we talked about job, career, calling. Likewise, for customers, there are multiple levels. For investors, there are multiple levels. Partners and society as well. So when you think about meeting all those needs at those different levels. And the last element, of course, is, and this is where the board of directors comes in, you have to hire CEOs who are conscious, servant-type leaders who are not just motivated by money. If somebody is coming because you've got the largest paycheck, well, they don't have a passion for what your business is. They have a passion for their bank account, right? It doesn't mean you don't pay people reasonably well, but you pay them reasonably well. You don't pay outrageous amounts. And the companies that we have, their CEOs make good amounts, but they're way below industry norms. And their frontline people make way above industry norms. And that seems to be a formula for succeeding. And you could argue that this invention has had a greater impact on humanity than almost any other invention for centuries. And that Tim Berners-Lee himself has been responsible for changing the world more than many of the giants of the 20th century. What has the internet done? Of course, it has provided access to information for virtually free, instantaneously, to almost everybody in the world. I mean, that the proportion of people with access to that is growing rapidly. So it has created an information democracy. It has democratized information, which means that people now know a lot more about what companies are doing than what companies know about people. We live now in a transparent world. There's almost anything that a company does will be made public, especially if it's controversial or negative. Most adults are in midlife and beyond, in a society, the values of society are going to mirror that. Now, what are the values of midlife? There really is a much greater concern, not with the individual and with the self-interest, but with the community. There's a much greater sense of interconnection. There's a much greater feeling or need to give back, to be of service and value to others. There's a greater emphasis on spiritual kinds of questions. Who am I really? What is my purpose? Is this all there is? What legacy am I going to leave behind? These are some of the questions that people start to think about in the second half of life. The field of developmental psychology tells us that we keep evolving as we go through life. It's not that once we become adults, we are set. And so it continues. So the complexion of society changes quite dramatically. So if you look at a society, I mean, all of these things go hand in hand. The other thing that happens when people age is that they tend to rise, especially in relatively prosperous economies, that they tend to move up what we know as the Maslow hierarchy of needs. So people are more motivated by higher level needs. It's not just physical comforts or safety and security, it's really more love and esteem and ultimately self-actualization, as Maslow referred to. So people are more motivated by higher level needs than they were in the past, which means that they're looking for more out of life in every aspect, including the businesses that they work for and the companies that they buy from and the companies that they allow into their communities, etc. So they have a different lens with which they view all those things, which means that businesses have to change, otherwise they will not get the business or the loyalty of this group. But the message going forward, we believe very strongly, is that if your company doesn't care, it will no longer be in business. Your company better care not only about your customers, but also your employees and your environmental impact and your broader societal impact. And of course, you have to care about being financially viable as well. I mean, we're not arguing against profits. As I mentioned earlier, these companies are highly profitable. They're very successful, and that's what enables them to continue to grow and do even more wonderful things. But they're creating a lot of hidden wealth and value that's not even captured in their fairly dramatic financial numbers. That being trusting and being trustworthy are some of the highest things that human beings can aspire to. They reflect the highest aspects of being, what it means to be human. And as Gary Hamel has said, we need to build organizations that are as human as the people who work there.